So I wasn't planning on making this video until I watched Miller's Girl, and I wasn't planning on watching Miller's Girl until I watched your internet mom Ash do a review of Miller's Girl.
This needs to be over in the next 10 minutes. Why did I put myself in this position to watch this movie?
Also, what do you think of the makeup? I've been having a really bad skin month recently, and I didn't want you to see how porous and scabbed up my face is, so I decided to go for the corpse paint, and then once I had the corpse paint, I realized I need to do a whole dark academia appearance outfit because of the subject matter of today's video. This is not dark academia at all. This is just Victorian metal.
Little child, don't cry or fear. We're all orphans here.
2024 has been a year for really good movies and really good shows, such as Lisa Frankenstein, which was such a good movie that I'm not even going to make a video about it simply because it would be me spending 7 minutes straight talking about how this movie was totally made for me and probably made by me too when I was 16. Another thing that came out in 2024 was this indie film called Miller's Girl, and I saw a trailer for it because it looked interesting. It appeared to be a video about a teenage girl and an older man who is also a teacher, and for no personal reasons, I just happen to have a fascination with age gaps and predatory dynamics and pedophiles, so I watched a trailer.
I don't know why anyone thought this was a college. It read as high school to me.
But from the trailer, I got the impression that the movie was about a high school girl who seduces and manipulates and gets a completely innocent teacher who never was interested in her in the first place arrested. And then when I watched your internet mom Ash review the movie, I got an even stronger impression that not only was this movie exactly about a teenage girl who seduces and manipulates an older man,
It's also incredibly disgusting with a lot of gratuitous sexual stuff.
What definitely turned me off to the trailer was that it seemed to be about a teenage girl seducing an innocent older man, and I didn't like that because that is an excuse so commonly made by older, manipulative, predatory men who insist that they were seduced by the younger teenage girls that they take advantage of. And it just bothered me because this doesn't happen.
Sure, everything in the world happens. I'm sure there are occasional instances of teenage high schoolers who are bored or angry and decided to take revenge on their high school teacher by framing them for pedophilia.
What happens way, way more often, a creepy, predatory high school teacher will groom one of the minors and then make her feel bad when she tries to stand up to him or report him. My bangs are so long and keep getting in my eyes and like touching my skin, and it's really annoying. Okay, the plot is basically there are two teenage girls who have crushes on their two older male teachers, and one of them actually goes far enough to be able to file a lawsuit against him, and she does end up filing a lawsuit against him, and that's basically the plot of the movie. The entire vibe and theme of the movie is kind of a dark academia, dark taboo romance that you might read on Wattpad. I noticed a lot of people were complaining about how unbelievable or unrealistic the characters were. It didn't make sense that in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, there is this huge Edwardian mansion that Cairo, the main character, lives in, and it doesn't make sense for her English classroom to look like this Harry Potter like classroom with these old-fashioned wooden desks. I think it reflected both Cairo, the student, and I think it reflected the teacher, Mr. Miller.
How they both had romantic Wattpad sort of fantasies.
I don't really like the choice, but I think it was a stylistic choice. Something I learned recently when I watched a YouTube video by Kira Sabin.
Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
This is the director's first film. She normally is a playwright, and that makes so much more sense. Everything was very dialogue heavy. It was a very narrative story. I agree with Kira Sabin. I do think it should have been a play and not a movie. It would have... Okay, so the first thing that surprised me was I fully expected Mr. Miller, the teacher, to be completely innocent, and I expected that out of malicious intent or boredom or
I don't know.
Cairo seduced him so that she could get him arrested. That's not actually what happened. Mr. Miller is the first one to give her uninvited attention. The first interaction between Mr. Miller and Cairo is when Cairo enters his English class, and she enters an hour early because she wants to leave a good impression on him. We find out that Mr. Miller used to be a writer, and Cairo is a huge fan of his books, and she seems to already be in awe of him, or inspired by him, or admire him, because she herself is a writer as well. That does not mean she's romantically interested in him. That just means she kind of idolizes and admires him. Because later we see Cairo and her best friend Winnie have a conversation. Winnie is Cairo's best friend, and Winnie is infatuated with the gym teacher who is best friends with Miller. So the gym teacher's name is Boris, and Winnie is infatuated with Boris and wants to have an intimate relationship with Boris. And as she and Cairo are discussing this, Cairo thinks it's weird that Winnie is obsessed with a man over 20 years older than her.
I would put the gym teacher as mid-40s. I know what people in their 30s look like. He does not look 30s, he looks 40s.
Mr. Miller, I don't know how old he's supposed to be. I think he's in his 50s. He looks 60 to me. The actor is 52. He does not look a day younger than 50. I'm not sorry to say.
Where was I going with this?
Cairo thinks it's weird that Winnie has a crush on the gym teacher, and that kind of shows that Cairo's not really interested in a romantic relationship with the teacher at all. Winnie then encourages it because Cairo is having a hard time finding a topic for her essay. She wants to get into Yale and she needs to write about her greatest achievement, and then Winnie thinks,
A great achievement would be to get into a relationship with the teacher.
we should really be pushing the status quo with human sexuality. That is our job as teenage girls. I'm not a teenage girl. Now, even then, Cairo isn't interested in having a relationship with Mr. Miller until Mr. Miller starts paying some really obvious special attention to her. First, he holds her after class for no reason whatsoever, and then spends that time chatting with her until she's like, he quotes an essay that she wrote to impress her, and then she in turn quotes some literature that he wrote, and they have,
I don't know, a little moment or something.
and then Mr. Miller asks her on a date to a poetry reading.
This is all uninvited.
When they do go to the poetry reading, Mr. Miller sits extremely close to her, and he also just comes up behind her and whispers, like, all creepily. I hated that part. Stop! He just whispers right into the microphone. It's such an assault on the ears. Now, when it comes to Cairo reciprocating feelings for Mr. Miller, here is where the movie loses me because the writer seems to have a difficult time finding out Cairo's motivation. At first, it seems that Cairo is only pursuing a relationship with Mr. Miller for her essay. And then when he goes to her house and they get pretty far romantically and maybe even sexually, then afterwards, Cairo feels rejected by him and decides to report his behavior because she feels spurned. And then afterwards, we get the impression that she fabricated this entire thing to be her greatest achievement just to write a Yale essay.
Cairo's motivation just doesn't make any sense at all.
I would like to try to piece together what I think is going on because
I think the writer did a horrible job here.
but I do think Jenna Ortega was working with what she had and she did a pretty good job. What I see is a teenage girl who was not initially interested in romantic advances from an older man, but she's already pretty bored and vulnerable. Here's another thing, just a quick thing. I noticed some people calling Cairo mature for her age, or like an intellectual savant or something, and that bothered me because just because she uses big words does not mean she's mature for her age. If you actually pay an iota of attention to the movie, you can tell that she is very much an angsty teenage girl. She just knows a lot of big poetic words because she likes to read and she's a writer. First of all, even if she were emotionally mature enough to have a relationship with a 50-year-old, does not mean that she should, because the experiential barrier is already so extreme, and the power imbalance of him being her teacher and having that position of power over her, that's already incredibly messed up. She's pretty sheltered and under-socialized, because I'm like this as well, and when I was 18, I was pretty intellectually mature for my age, and I was pretty good at articulating myself. But I genuinely feel like I had the emotional maturity of a 13-year-old. I was not ready for a relationship with a much older adult. In a lot of ways, I was still a child, even though I had the word legal attached to my age.
You talk differently to someone you consider a child than someone you consider an adult.
Yeah, of course.
They just turned that around for practical purposes.
Yeah.
I would never speak to a child the way I speak to you. I don't know, right?
Just like 10 or 11 months. Wait, no, what month is it? It's February. Like just 9 or 10 months difference. Sorry, go on.
Whatever.
Go on. Just ignore me.
But
intellectual maturity. I'm intellectually mature, I'm not very emotionally mature. I know. I don't know, in some ways. In some ways, yeah. I like that. maybe I'm the pedophile. Are you grooming me? Oh, every step of the way. Oh, man.
But anyways, right, I was going to try to piece together what I think is going on with Cairo's interest in Mr. Miller, because I do see some parallels with her and myself. She was not interested in an older man flirting with her, but she did like the attention a lot. And the more she talked to Mr. Miller, the more she found him to be an interesting person that she grew to trust and wanted to get closer to. As a young, troubled artist, she liked the idea of defying the status quo and breaking the norm and having a taboo relationship.
If it's not controversial, it's not interesting.
So the idea of having this socially unconventional relationship with her teacher, who is already married, that likely appeals to the artist within her. And then as she grows closer to him, she feels as if, he's interested in her because he spends a lot of time with her, talking to her, paying her special treatment. After they get close to consummating their pseudo-relationship, that is when Mr. Miller just completely pulls back and, tries to climb out of the situation that he created. She feels hurt. This 50-year-old man was pursuing her in the first place, and then when she finally started reciprocating, that's when he pulled back. The movie makes it seem that Cairo only reported Mr. Miller's inappropriate behavior because she wanted to ruin his life because he rejected her. That really does bother me because it suggests that it is petty to report a teacher who pursues a relationship with a student. I mean, even if the student was interested in a relationship, that does not mean it's okay for a teacher to do it. For instance, Winnie goes out of her way to flirt with Coach Boris, but the thing is, he is receptive to it. He enables and rewards her flirtatious behavior with higher grades or getting her into the classes that she wants. At the end of the movie, Boris berates Miller. Boris is just as bad as Mr. Miller. All the adults, and by adults I mean all the people over 18, not the two girls who are exactly 18. All the adults, much older than 18, are all horrible in this story, but more on them later. I do think it makes sense that after Mr. Miller rejected Cairo, that was when she chose to report him, and that she likely would have never reported him had he been open to an actual committed relationship. When I was in a relationship with somebody way older than me, and I felt disgust or fear, I chose to repress that because I was getting a lot of dopamine from spending so much time every day with somebody that I loved, and I didn't want to end that. And we didn't break up because I realized that what he was doing was wrong. We broke up because after everything, he just lost interest in me. And all that disgust and fear and horror that I was repressing those 8 months, I chose to see it for what it was. I can see what she's doing, and I do think that Jenna Ortega worked with what she was given. I don't think the writer really knew what she was doing. Let's talk a little bit about how awful the adults were in the situation. So this story really only had 5 characters. So the writer of the film wanted to push audience expectations and cause them to really study their deep-rooted preconceived beliefs about a situation like this. She didn't execute it very well. I'm sure there are occasional instances where vengeful or bored teenagers ruin teachers' lives for the fun of it. It happens way less often than teachers actually taking advantage of students, and I don't like this story being shown so much in media because it's just tired, and we don't need another
teenage girl who is actually in control, girl bossing her way into ruining an old man's life.
That's the excuse that a lot of these older men have for these girls. It did look like the writer wasn't exactly going for full Cairo was the villain the entire time kind of thing, but that was kind of the message that the writer left us with. There are a lot of scenes where Mr. Miller is just disrespected by everyone around him, and his life seems to be very dull and monotonous, and his wife isn't giving him any attention and just patronizing him, and then by the end of the movie, he gets berated by his wife, his best friend, and the girl he was in love with.
We're treated to a scene where both Cairo and Mrs. Miller repeat how pathetic and mediocre they think Mr. Miller are, and we're supposed to interpret from the situation, look at this poor man, no wonder he wanted to talk to Cairo. I mean, he's been dealt so many blows in his life. No, he is pathetic and a loser for flirting with an 18-year-old. I feel no sympathy because that's the truth.
This is something I talked about in my passive predation video.
Very frequently, these men don't have the respect of women around them. Older women are a bit more aware of this guy's tricks, or they find the guy has an insufferable childish personality. The response of the men is to not then look for younger women who are not going to look down on them. The response for men is to say, okay, well, how can I become a more mature adult?
A lot of these men who don't tend to go after teenage girls might find that a teenage girl is the only woman willing to respect him. Maybe the reason you're not respected or taken seriously is because you're not respectable, and maybe you need to fix yourself instead of going after a teenage girl who doesn't know any better. Anyways, okay, let's talk about the wife now. The wife's name was B. She was horrible too. It's kind of just this really open secret that both men have teenage girls who have huge crushes on them, and even B goes along with joking about that. And when B finds out that Cairo wrote a smut fanfiction about her and Mr. Miller, she thinks that's so funny to the point that she's literally turned on by it. Hold on a second. Even if it is just a joke, even if it is just a teenage crush, that is so disgusting that you would be turned on by a teenage girl's fan fiction of your husband. Like, dude. She also makes advances toward Boris and just in general seems like a pretty crappy person. And then Boris is also bad. He is just as bad as Mr. Miller, and it is horrendous that he seems to think he is morally superior than Mr. Miller by the end of the movie just because he didn't go far enough to get caught the way Mr. Miller did. The character Winnie, Cairo has to remind Winnie multiple times that you're a lesbian, which gives me the impression that maybe Winnie came out as a lesbian at some point, but Winnie is very clearly infatuated with Boris. So, I mean, like,
bisexuality exists.
Lesbians are not attracted to men. I do not know what to tell you. Winnie is constantly flirting, just overtly flirting with Boris. She flirts with him in front of Mr. Miller and Mr. Miller's wife in a restaurant. She's just way too comfortable with these teachers, and these teachers are way too comfortable with her being inappropriate in front of them. You know, she even gets Boris's number, and Boris is just so willing to give her his number and then respond to her messages when she is being silly and flirtatious. And as a teacher, what you do in that situation is you ignore it. If a student has a crush on you, you ignore it and you pretend it's not there, and you treat that student like a normal student. You do not treat that student like a friend, because it's okay to be friends with people who are younger than you. Like, sure, whatever, but we know what you mean. We know what you mean. Boris is morally reprehensible, Mr. Miller is morally reprehensible, and B is morally reprehensible. I'm trying to think if there were any other points I had of criticism. Another thing, the score was terrible. I'm annoyed by all the people who insist that the score of the movie was beautiful. Watch better movies that have way better soundtracks. The soundtrack of this was absolutely horrible. It was literally like a Wattpad fanfiction come to life. I will say that in spite of how terrible the writing was and how terrible the plot was, I did get some things out of it. I did think that Jenna Ortega's acting brought a lot to the movie, and it really did show a lot of things, because you do see her crying and visibly upset when it looks like Mr. Miller rejected her. And that's another thing. Some people were wondering, did they do it? Did Cairo and Mr. Miller go all the way?
If they performed basic coitus, I do not believe that happened.
Because multiple times Winnie reminds Cairo and Cairo reminds Winnie that that specific act never happened. But Winnie does also mention that Cairo is often very vague about things that she does. So it is possible that they did actually go as far as to perform coitus with each other. I do think that there was something a little bit beyond just kissing once in the rain, because both Mr. Miller and Cairo admit that he entered her house, and there might have been more kissing, there might have been other stuff, but I definitely think that, you know, whatever it was, it did warrant him being investigated and suspended from his position. But all in all, this movie just didn't have to happen. It really added nothing new to the conversation about teacher-student relationships. It's really very black and white when I look at it. This relationship was very inappropriate. Not illegal, but just because something isn't illegal doesn't mean it is morally okay. And this is very much not morally okay, and I don't think that the movie did enough to show that this was not morally okay, to the point where it almost did encourage the false narrative that these victims, they only come forward when they want to intentionally ruin a man's life. Just inappropriate, not okay, unbalanced, asymmetrical, etc. Okay, I'm done with this movie. It made me angry. Okay, bye.